Okay, let's talk about my January reading. So, no need for like preludes, prologues, whatever. Let's just get into it. So let's talk about my stats, my physical TBR stats, that is. I started out the year owning 181 unread books. I then bought 8 books, and I read 4 books off of my TBR. So going into February, I was at 185 books, unread. I instated a kind of book buying challenge for myself this year, which I talk about in a different video that I'll link. I never remember to link up here, so it'll probably just be in the description, where I did purchase these 8 books before I instated that, so hopefully I will actually get my physical TBR down this year, and when I talk about stats, I won't continuously be like, well, I maybe increased my TBR by 3 books, or maybe it's the same as it was going into the month. The goal for this year is to decrease that TBR. So let's get into the books I read. Let's start with the first, the only book I read in translation for the month, which was Memoirs of a Porcupine. I liked this book. It's essentially about a porcupine who is under a tree, and he is kind of going through the memoir of not his life, but the life of a man who he is the evil animal double for. And I'm not sure if this is like a specific area of African folklore or culture or whatnot, but essentially everyone has an animal double. Most people have a good animal double. This man has an evil animal double, and the porcupine is his evil animal double. So he kind of goes through the process, the porcupine, of how, this man's life as a child, how he became the evil double of this man, and then the acts of evil that they committed together. It is talking about, horrific things that are done, like murdering people, but in a nonchalant, kind of conversational way. Kind of the porcupine coming to terms with what he has done for this man, for his double, and does he feel sorrow? What did these people deserve it? Plot, progressive wise of the plot, it went forward at a really nice rate. I really enjoyed the conversational tone of it. I liked the writing. The plot for myself as a Western reader was honestly super fresh and unlike anything I had ever read before. And I enjoyed it honestly a lot more than I was expecting to, and would recommend it. It was just a fun read. Let's talk about the romances I read in the month. The first one I read was A Lot Like Adios by Alexis Daria. This is the second book in the Pre-Mess of Power series of companion novels. It is of friends to lovers, but also kind of a second chance romance. You meet your protagonists when they're in their early 30s. They were best friends in high school. The last time they saw each other when they were 18, maybe something happened between them, and now they're being brought back together after not speaking for years. This series by Alexis Daria is really family focused. So, she, the female protagonist, and I apologize, I never remember anyone's names, but the female protagonist was very family-oriented, always talking to her family, but maybe keeping her relationships to herself. Maybe she was a little private. And the male of the relationship, it's not like I disliked this book, because I enjoyed it for what it was, but romance is very formulaic. And so the formula is bare bones, is you have a couple that have their happily ever after. Like, you know the couple is going to be together at the end, or else it's not a romance. To be successful, in my opinion, you have to have the two characters on their own be likable in some capacity, or be able to root for them to be together. And my problem with this was I did not like him. I didn't hate him, but his problems were just like so self-made. Like, yes, he had family issues. Yes, I could see how those impacted him. No, I don't understand how he could ignore his family for almost a decade because of them. Just like, I just didn't really get it. And the book, for me, was much more about him than it was the female lead, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I didn't like him, and I didn't think that he was just kind of a douchebag. Every conflict is because he can't deal with his own problems. And she's just kind of being roped along into these horrible plans because he can't deal with himself. And it was just very, like, one-sided for me. Like, I felt like she could do better, and she honestly should do better. So yeah, I didn't really, like, ship him as a human. Like, he was just kind of a douchebag. But I do like the friends to lovers trope, and I do like the second chance romance. So, it was one I already knew, like, I was probably going to get along with in some capacity, but yeah, I just really did not jive with the male lead. And then I read Radiance by Grace Draven, which, great. It was great. This is a friends to lovers, and in all other friends to lovers books I've read, they are friends before the book starts. And then, so you don't see that dynamic develop. You see the dynamic of the relationship develop. But in this, you watch them go from strangers to friends to lovers, and perfect recipe for me. This is a fantasy romance, and they are different humanoid species. She is a human, he is something that is kind of human, but the two species find each other physically repulsive. They think they're so ugly and like can't really like take the time to look at each other. So that's how the book starts, with them meeting, not knowing they're each other's betrothed, and just kind of like joking around about how ugly the other one is. His species has a really big thing about like human eyes, which was kind of a funny thing that kept coming up throughout the book, and I was already cracking up. Humor-wise, it did a lot for me. I really bought them turning into friends and then turning into lovers. I really loved the execution of the third act conflict. I usually don't like when the conflict is something kind of like internal to the relationship as much. I'm more, not to say that I don't like that, but it just, sometimes it feels like authors are creating a fake conflict for no reason because they need the conflict, because you have to have a conflict at some point in the romance. But with this, I liked how it was executed. I loved the slow burn aspects of it. I was so rooting for them to be together. I loved her on her own. I loved him on his own. I think that the part that was the most lackluster was the sex scenes. It was slow burn, so it took a while for us to get to that part. And when they happened, I was just like, I don't know. I mean, like, this is the thing. I don't want it to just be like a plug and chug, if you get what I'm saying, because like that's not that cute. It's like, yeah, get him off, cool. But I'm a female reading this. I'd like to see her have some pleasure outside of that situation. So that was one part. But the thing is, how his species is written, he has like claws. He's dangerous, right? Like he can't like use his hands or maybe use his tongue because he got teeth in the way. So I'm not sure if there was much you could do there, but I feel like it would have been better for me if like the scenes kind of faded to black, but then I probably would have been annoyed if they faded to black. So I don't know. I get really annoyed when romance novels fade to black, because I'm like, why do you think I'm reading this? Let's be honest. So, oh man. So yeah, great book. Had an epilogue that made me think that there's actually like room for plot in a second book, but a romance is really about the characters ending up together. But there was definitely like some characters that they were setting up to end up together at some point. So I would be interested in reading the second book, but it's not like I'm being driven to. Last romance I read of the month, Neon Gods by not Talia Hibbert, by Katee Robert. I've read a decent number of Katee Robert books, and they are usually novellas. I've read her, what is that series called? Wicked Villains? I don't know. It's smutty, like intensely erotica, smutty novellas. And this was a, what is it called? Just like a normally published book. It wasn't self-published. So like you could buy it at like bookstores and like, you know, it gets better marketing around it. And it was a full-length book. It's a Hades and Persephone retelling. I'm going to be honest, like I've never read the original, don't care to. She took the concept of gods and made them like roles in society. So there was a lot of like politics happening between Zeus and Hades and like the other characters. And that was kind of what created the tension of the book. The romance was just like fine. Like I didn't really care about either. It wasn't like I disliked the characters or liked the characters. I just was very apathetic towards it. And then because it was Katee Roberts and it kept hinting at like taboo things happening, I was expecting eventually for like, you know, it to be less vanilla. But for her, it was rather vanilla. I wouldn't call this vanilla. It's not. There is like public scenes occurring, but it kept hinting at it being like a little bit more intense. And I feel like she was like trying to catch her audience for her self-pub stuff. And then she never like delivered on that. And I don't know if it's because of how it was published or whatnot, but I really don't have too much to say on this book. It was just fine. Now let's talk about the two nonfiction books I read in the month. So the first one I read was Sitting Pretty by Rebekah Taussig. This is a memoir. Rebekah Taussig has been disabled for most of her life. Since she was 3 years old, she's been using a wheelchair. And she kind of talks about just her life, the way that her disabled body is viewed by others, the way that society makes it difficult for her to just exist. Memoirs are inherently, what do I want to say? Personal, right? But she had this way of like discussing issues where it was like, she didn't really have the answer. She was trying to just kind of bring you through her thought process on things that were undeveloped, and there's something really vulnerable about that. She also has I believe a PhD in disability theory or something to that effect, and there's a point where she talks about like being straight out of her degree, going to work at a school, for like a high school, and trying to teach disability rhetoric and disability theory, and just the issues that comes up with that. These people, like this group of, this demographic that we think of as like so ready to accept and understand other perspectives. As she was bringing them through disability theory, they had like for the most part, a really hard time engaging in the concept. As someone, if you are not new to disability theory, I have a feeling that some of this book would feel like, yeah, I already know that. But for me, who is honestly super fresh to disability theory, I really appreciated the sections where she was talking about it through the lens of how she taught it to high schoolers, because for me, like, it was like the level I needed it to be at for me to conceptually, like, understand it. But yeah, how she described some stuff was really greatly done. I really appreciated the balance between her vulnerable moments of, like, her personal life. She talks about her dating life. She talks about her first marriage. She talks about her difficulties, like, being comfortable with herself. And I just thought it was a great read. The next one I read was The Second Amendment. Okay, this one I just didn't have as good of an experience with. So the Second Amendment is, like, in the United States, a highly contentious amendment. I had a lot of issues with this book. My main issue is I felt like it could be, like, there could be a 20-minute summary of the book and it would give me, like, the main things I needed to know. One of the main things being that it wasn't until, like, 2008 that the Supreme Court determined, I don't know the right language, that the Second Amendment was a personal right. And before that, that wasn't a thing. So, yeah, that was really wild. Structurally, the book kind of took you back to colonial times, talked about how guns were talked about how firearms were used in those times, talked about how like armies and assembly, like the assemblage of armed folks was a legal requirement. It was like at a the militias, that's the word I'm looking for. The discussion of militias, militia intent, and how, like, people had to own their own firearm to be a part of the militia. Like, they weren't going to provide it for you. You had to bring your own. So you had to own your own. But that's kind of where the book goes. Like, did you have to own your own because it was a personal right, or did you have to own your own because it was a right of the state? This book is really highly focused on the law, which makes sense, right? It's like the history of the Second Amendment and how it is understood through time by different judicial systems. The problem is it's the type of nonfiction that I don't like. I don't like when it's super fact-based. Not to say I don't want facts in my nonfiction, but it's just like, and then this, and then this, and then this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and this date, and this date, and this date. And, like, you need that type of stuff to build up your argument, but it felt like a lot of facts being placed together and not a lot of analysis of those facts. And I come to my nonfiction for both, but, like, more importantly, I need an analysis in there. And I really didn't feel like there was much of one. Like, there was, but it was lacking. So that's another part of this I want to talk about. He was so focused on, like, these facts and the laws that he didn't take into account, like, other societal factors in the changing of the ownership rights in guns in society. Like, race was completely overlooked, which, how? Like, actually how? And this issue kind of goes into my next issue of his language use. So he used the term urban poor quite a bit, and, like, the term criminals a lot, and it felt very coded. I really don't like when people in contexts like this use the term urban. Like, you're trying to say something without actually saying it, and I just personally, it's a no. He also used like very, I don't want to say politicized language, but just, yeah, the terms he used, like, and kind of like the rudeness of some of his language. It was really bizarre. He was like, in one part, he was talking about this guy who did something and it wasn't that great. And then he said something to the effect of, and when I try to look into where he's at now, he's a bartender here, like as if that mattered at all, like at all. So yeah, and then he used really inflammatory language, just the jargon he chose to use to like identify names and concepts and ideas felt very intentional and heavy-handed, but like didn't work for me. So this gave me some knowledge of the Second Amendment, but I feel like I would have to read more books to really like get like a full comprehensive view, which it called this a biography of the Second Amendment, so in my head I should have gotten like a bigger picture. The last thing that I read was kind of like a few things from a series. The series in question is The Song of the Shattered Sands by Bradley P. Beaulieu. This is a 6-book desert fantasy series that also has like, I think, 5 novellas, so pretty big thing to take on. I read the 2nd book and 2 of the novellas in this month, so I don't think I'm going to have too much to say on it, but I'll essentially give the premise of the 1st book. So it's, like I said, a desert fantasy. In this world, there are the old gods, the new gods, and the 12 kings of Sharakai, the main city that you're in, that are almost godlike figures who have lived for like 400 years. You get to see like many parts of the society. So you follow Cheda, who is your main protagonist, I would say, and she grew up as like a street rat, like a street urchin. They call it like some gutter wren. I think that's what they call it in this book. But she grew up poor. She grew up with a single mother. She grew up learning to hate the kings. And there's a lot of like mystery about who her mother was and her relation to the kings and her relation to a specific god. And then you have her best friend, Emery, who also grew up on the streets. They became friends at a very young age. At the start of the book, they live together, and it's there, like, there's a lot of, like, built-up tension between the two of them. They've never had a sexual relation, but it's obvious that they like each other in more than a platonic manner, but neither of them have done anything about it. And when you take those two characters, it's really about both of their hatred of the kings, but their divergence in how they choose to act upon that. So you're really seeing like a totally different set of scenes in parts of the life and atmosphere. One of them kind of gets closer to like the Blade Maidens and like the kings. Like the Blade Maidens are the women who protect the kings, and one of them gets more involved in like the underbelly of society and like this group that is trying to overthrow the kings in a more subverted way. And then you have 2 other perspectives that you're watching. You're seeing actually a perspective of one of the kings and the going-ons, and that perspective becomes more interesting in the 2nd book. And then you have a prince of another land who has a vendetta against the Moonless Host, which is like the underbelly society that one of those main characters kind of gets involved with, for the murder of his wife and child. And he's from a different kingdom, so it's an interaction of another kingdom with the realm of Sharakai and the 12 kings. There's a lot going on in these novels. There's tons of characters you have to keep track of. I have a list of like kings, gods, what their deal is, characters, what realms they're from, who interacts with who, because like there's so many characters, and like I was noticing that there's characters like kind of being tied together in the second book that I didn't think were going to be tied together from the first book. So there's just kind of a lot. There's a lot going on here, a lot to sink into. I appreciated the novellas. It gave a background to some of the characters that were in the second book that while you didn't necessarily need to know it, it did definitely help. I guess in finishing the second book, I'm like, how the hell are there 4 more books? Like, what is going to happen here? I have no idea where this series is going to go. I'm not the type of person that tries to guess where a series is going to go, but so far I can't really say if I would recommend it or not because it's quite a bit to get into, but there you have it. Those are all the books I read in January. Let me know what you read in January. Let me know your thoughts on these books. Do I have anything else? No, I don't. Until next time, happy reading.